conversation with.
Hi everyone. So we are in conversation with Pratikshya Paramita today, and we are here to discuss her Instagram page called Books, Chai and Music. So Pratikshya Paramita has graduated from Narsi Munji Institute of Management Studies in Mumbai and holds a degree in BBA. The last 3 years, she has been associated with companies such as Genpact as a content writer. She decided 3 years ago that she wanted to work in an area where she would use her wordsmith abilities. She has been writing since she was 12 years old and has always discussed literature since her much younger days. Now, Pratiksha basically believes that the area of content will be the way forward in this world that consumes it at all points. You can see her passion for what she does through her Instagram page, Books, Chai, Music. A page which is mostly dedicated to reviewing books and a little bit about chai and a little bit about music. So, hi Pratiksha, how are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. So, firstly, we'd like to start with where you grew up and what you studied and why.
So I grew up in Delhi actually, and I studied in Carmel Convent in Delhi, which is pretty much very dedicated to music as such. The school was extremely forward with music and ability of music that people had. So I think that's where my idea of music stems from. I've also grown up in a family which is extremely dedicated to music and literature. My grandfather has written multiple books in the regional language, along, and he's also an English lit honors student. And he was quite a bit a part of my childhood. So he's a big reason that I read. Along with that, I have a very voracious reader for a mother. So she would always buy me books no matter what. And it was a very big thing in the family that if you read, you are smart. If you don't read, you are not. So that's how it was. And I wanted to be smart in the family, so I always read. But
What books did your grandfather write on, even in the regional language? And what language was it?
So my grandfather wrote in Odia, and he wrote till like 10 years back. He was still writing books in Odia, and that's my mother tongue basically. Along with that, he was writing all kinds of books. Like he wrote fiction as well as non-fiction. In fiction, he was writing in non-fiction actually. Sorry, he was writing more about his experiences as a police officer. So how he dealt with cases and how cases are being dealt with, etc. In fiction, he's written a lot of comedies. So that's somewhere
You should
that is.
consider maybe translating them one day so we can all read them in English. So, how did you get into the making of book chai music on Instagram? And what was your inspiration behind it? Like you just said, your grandfather, of course, was a very massive part of it. Was there any other reason that you got into it, or any other inspiration aspects, whether it was books or people or events?
So I think for the longest time, like a lot of people had been telling me that I need to put out what I feel about music in India quite a bit. And I do feel quite a bit about music in India. One of them was actually you as well, who said that I should consider talking about it at a much bigger platform and not just my private account.
Yeah, absolutely.
And somewhere down the line after 2019, and especially in 2019, when I was applying for jobs, and it completely stemmed from there and where it has come to now, was that they asked me for personal portfolios. And when you look at companies, they work in a way that your content goes through a lot of back pulling and a lot of pushbacks and a lot of forwards and everything and a lot of edits. So it doesn't technically remain as your content. So I wanted to show off what I would do if I was running something and how I would present that content out. In 2018 was when I discovered the community called Bookstagram. Around the end of 2018 was when I discovered it, and I saw a lot of people were sharing what they think is good books and what their views about the books through Instagram. And I felt like it was a very nice community that I wanted to be part of because I've always enjoyed reading. And the past few years, I'd also stopped reading as much as I usually read. And I wanted to take that up and do a better job with it to actually read a lot more. I also thought that my views about, and the two things other than books and that I care about is music and chai. So that's how I ended up starting Books Try Music. And it's very funny how I started on 1st January. And the one, I think, the only one resolution that I've stuck to is this, that I'm still going strong with it.
But you know, like you correctly said, that you stopped reading for a while recently, because I think in the digital age, it's become very difficult for us because we've got so much. We've even got from audiobooks to movies to TV shows. What would you say that really encourages you to read a book and really get down on it with all the other digital distractions around you? And what would you also, what inspiration can you give to the younger generation to really pick up a book and start reading without their phone, without messaging, without WhatsApp? Because I think, you know, reading has become, it's almost like an abnormality among the younger generation, except for maybe the school books, which is really not great. And
Yeah.
we all know that through even your Instagram page, through me knowing you personally, we know that Agatha Christie has been a huge part of your childhood. You know,
Yeah.
it's someone that you've cherished since you were maybe 10 years old. And I feel like they're really going to miss out on a part of their childhood if they don't get into Enid Blyton's. That was a major part of my childhood. Sherlock Holmes, so, you know, Conan Doyle, major part of my childhood. So, what sort of inspiration can you give the younger generation, even by starting your page? Because I think it's so important giving reviews on books where you can tell someone, hey, pick this up, this will be great, just give it a go.
So I think where I drew my inspiration to read was that I really enjoy stories. Like I think the fact that I'm I'm extremely fond of stories. So one thing I genuinely struggle with is I really can't understand self-help books. And I kudos to everyone who reads it. I think you're really smart if you're reading self-help books. And the other one I don't understand is nonfiction because I'm just like I'll just read an article. But I love stories. I love the idea of stories. And if you tell me magic, I am instantly attracted to it.
Right.
So, very simply put, more than children, I think to parents, for me, it would be that bring your books to your children. Because the reason that I probably like Agatha or the fact that I like Enid Blyton is something that my mom got to me or my grandfather got to me and like told me, I think you will like it and read it. And despite whatever age and whatever generation they wrote in, I think they've written some great books. Like, I think even today, when a child picks up a murder on the Orient Express, they are mind blown by the end of the book. They're just, it's just such beautiful writing. Or you could pick up Mallory Towers even now, and just it's so relatable because you are at that age. She writes Famous Five, Secret Seven, Nancy Drews, Hardy Boys. Your child likes to watch a certain type of TV series, a certain type of thing. Try to get books according to that. If somebody, like for example, if someone likes to watch Scooby Doo even now, get them a Famous Five. They will love it. Or get them a Scooby Doo comic book. They will love that also. Comic books are equally good. But if you feel like, again, if you feel like your children are not reading, are not towards reading, then maybe you should try looking at audiobooks because that's audiobooks is something I've recently discovered. And it's just massively good to just sit back, relax, and just put in the headphones and listen to it. And maybe your child is not towards a reading arc. Maybe you can get them through the audio arc. But I think children really deserve to read some old books and just understand how culture has come and where it has come. And for adults, definitely pick up a Perry Mason again. It's just so good, those books.
Do you also think that growing up with a lot of reading in your family, like you said, because literature was a very major part of your background and family as well, do you think that it's actually influenced you as a human being among your favorite authors, your favorite books, whether you picked up a Harry Potter? Do you think like in some way it's influenced or shaped your life onto what you become since content writing was really your strong suit? And do you think it helps children grow into like not better human beings, but maybe give them inspiration, you know, or they can believe that they will rule the world one day or do something better through the books? Do you think
Okay.
that's been a major part of your upbringing and your childhood? And also, who are your favorite authors and your favorite books?
Okay. So I think I'll go with the first one first. Is that definitely they've shaped who I am today. So there's a lot of literature actually on how reading builds empathy among children and why they need to start at a younger age than what they are starting at right now. But like reading genuinely builds empathy and how fiction specifically helps build empathy among children because fiction gets in a lot into your brain and your imagination. So it's a lot to do with your visualization, and it also gives you a perspective. Non-fiction is usually a single perspective, but fiction gives you a wide variety of perspectives. So that is how fiction helps build empathy among children. So that's one of the things that I know that is my strongest tool, that I'm a really empathetic person. And for my own good also, I'm way, way too empathetic. But that's how I have been built through the books that I've read, is that I've usually read a Hercule Poirot or a Miss Marple, or there used to be this Enid Blyton series called The Naughtiest Girl in School, which used to be my favorite when I was a kid. And whether be it a Lewis Carroll, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, because that was the first book that I read that my mom got me, which was color and read, and it was too fun. Like, it was a blue dress and made it blue. So I think it's genuinely, it has shaped me to a huge extent, because every time I read a book, I felt like the author was a superhero because they could write something like this. And from a young age, I felt like that this is such a cool job. And I think it is my dream that I will one day write a book. I don't know when it will be. I don't know where it will be, but it will happen someday in life. But it has definitely shaped me, because that has been my dream since I've thought of a dream. I've wanted to be an author, and that's where I come into content, because I wanted to write, and so I wrote. And this is where I am. And coming to my favorite authors, so I definitely love Agatha. Like, I think she's just so cool. Like, every time I read her, I am absolutely blown away. I was, in fact, reading this weekend another Agatha, and I was texting you itself and saying that I can't believe she used to write this way. For me, Agatha, on a very personal level, also becomes a really good author, because she was in an era where women were not considered to be as famous as she was. She's had so many books that I'm still reading her, despite that every year I read at least 2 or 3 Agatha Christie's. Agatha for me is home, because along with that, and the fact that she, like, there's a thing, right, that J.K. Rowling wrote Harry Potter and was called J.K. Rowling in the thing, so that people don't realize that she's a woman and start picking up the books. They never put out her name as Jonathan Keatlin Rowling. Whereas Agatha Christie is never a Christie, she's always Agatha, and people still picked up her books. And this is coming from a time when women were not considered to be doing any work. And she wrote a character like Miss Marple, she wrote somebody like Hercule Poirot. I understand they're also a character out of their generation. So I give them a lot of leeway for a lot of things that they say which won't work with this. But at the same time, I still feel like it's a lot to do with empowering women, which every time I read an Agatha, I feel very empowered, for the simple reason that she can portray a woman to be the most powerful one in a story and the most devilish one in the next.
No, thank you. So, who would you say are your Bookstagram role models, your general role models, and also, apart from your inspiration, which you already just spoke about, what would be your goal for the audience of people who are on your Books Chai music page? Like, what would you like them to really gain out of it?
So what I want people to gain out of Books Chai music firstly would be that I just want people to get more books to read. I think we go to a bookshop and we look at a blurb of the book and we're just suddenly attracted to it. But how much, like, especially in this new normal, how much time do you actually have to, or do you actually want to go to a bookstore and just go through a book and see what you want? And we don't even have the time to do that. We're constantly on phones, we're constantly on Instagram or on Facebook or on YouTube. And I feel like this is where you can address people. So I want to address people to pick up a book, read it. There are a lot of people who have lost their love for reading. So I think I want to address them specifically, because the kind of books that I'm reading are for a generation which is more like us, which is towards 22 and above, because I don't read as much middle grade books anymore, even though I do read young adult literature a little. But I'm more attracted towards historical fiction and towards adult fantasy, or mysteries and thrillers are just my absolute favorite genre. It's a bad day, I want to sit back and read a murder mystery. Add a murder to a bad day, it makes my day better. Uh, but that's where I come from. I just want to address a crowd who has lost their love for reading, and for them to look at my page and see that you can still read while you are working. Just take out the time, or just maybe find that book again. Maybe you lost it after the last Harry Potter, or maybe you lost it after reading the last Lord of the Rings. But there's a lot more that you can read. So why not pick up something else?
And who are your Bookstagram, you would say, role models, or even people that you look up to or who you follow?
I think my specifically role model that way on Bookstagram was this woman called who runs this Instagram page called Chai Books and the Moon, and so it just automatically struck a chord with me because she spoke about chai and books, and she was one of the first few people that I started following from my personal page, and what she was doing was she was doing very minimalistic pictures, and she was pretty much working on making her page not so much concentrated on the bookish merchandise, which happens a lot on Instagram, but to make it about the book. So I think she was one of the first few people that I really liked. Along with her, there is another bookstagrammer called the Nocturnal Reader. He was also someone that I followed from the beginning, from my personal page, and we actually had a conversation. He and I actually had a conversation where he was reading a book, and I was saying that I've read it and how do you like it, and that conversation went on a little further. And he was the one who told me that I should probably join Bookstagram as a community because I genuinely look at a book as a whole and not just for pleasure reading. And that's also how I ended up here. Authors, other than Agatha Christie, I think I've loved Chitra Devakarini from India. She
I'm really
writes.
glad you mentioned an Indian author because I think it's important for people to also read Indian authors more
Yeah,
than
I
yeah.
Yeah, in fact, there is one Indian author who's recently written a fantasy book, which is considered to be an equivalent of the Harry Potter series for this generation, called The Crossword Worlds or something like that. I'm mistaken. I will get back to you on the name and you can put it in the description maybe. But there's an Indian author who's writing something which is completely in parallel to Harry Potter. A lot of people are talking about it on different avenues, and it's considered to be a very, very good series actually.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah, I'd love to read it.
And so Chitra Devakadni writes mythological fiction.
Yeah.
So she's the female version of Amish Tripathi. I just think she's a little better than Amish Tripathi, no offense. But because she writes from a woman's perspective, the only reason. So she's written Mahabharat from the perspective of Draupadi. She's written Ramayan from the perspective of Sita. Recently she followed me on Instagram and I had a blast. Like I was over the top in love with my Instagram that day because she followed me and that was the first thing in the morning that I saw. She's the only author I think this like if Agatha Christie was alive, probably her. But other than her, she's the only author that I have snuck out or like sneaked out on YouTube and Instagram and seen videos of her and seen her talk about a lot of her books. So she's one great author, I feel, who's
So
just
you would
marvelous.
definitely say she was one of your main inspirations as well.
Yeah, she's one of my main inspirations for sure. She's the person who taught me feminism when I was 16, because that's when I read A Palace of Illusions, and it's an amazing book that you want your children, especially teenage girls, to pick up and just read.
So how easy or difficult would you say it is to gain organic followers? And since we've spoken so much about your love for books and authors, let's speak a little more about the second half of your Instagram page as well, which is chai and music. And also your posts are so beautifully done and they're so beautifully captured. Is photography something that you've always loved doing, or is it something that you've gained through your Instagram page? Because content writing, like you said, has been something that's been in your blood since you've been a child. So what does it take also to have or to make a really good post? And how long do you take also to sit down and really review what you're doing with the photograph and the content? And how have you, as a Instagram person, managed to really gain your organic followers and managed to gain a crowd on Instagram, considering you always get at least like 50, 60 comments and they're all extremely relevant to your posts as well? So how do you manage this on your page?
Um, so one of the things that I do a lot is that I actually go on other people's, if I'm looking at my newsfeed and I find something interesting, then I make it a point to like it, to comment on it. And if I really like it, I also send a message to that person saying how much I liked it and we get into a discussion about it. So I totally believe that Instagram is a world of you give and you get back.
Right.
There's no other way to deal with it, and it's a community, so you have to build it, you have to work on it like a community.
Yeah.
I also found a lot of people on Bookstagram when I started who had a lot of followers. So they shared my account because they thought it was good content, and they shared my account quite a bit. So that's how I ended up gaining a lot of followers. I make sure every post has relevant hashtags on it. So as soon as you put a relevant hashtag, it automatically becomes a better idea for people to come back and get in touch with you. Because the moment you put an irrelevant hashtag, people automatically get squeezed off and don't want to then engage on your posts as much as they would like to. My music and chai posts actually don't do as well as my books posts, because, and that's why probably they're on the lower count on my account. I think music, and I was discussing this with another person who's a data scientist who was a data scientist with TikTok, and she was telling me how music is a overly used platform now and overly used concept on Instagram presently. And so even if you get 150 plus likes, it's completely fine and it's great engagement actually. Music for me, and the reason I actually do those music posts is because I feel like we don't pay enough attention to Indian artists. And by Indian artists, I don't mean the people singing in Bollywood or any of that, but I feel the people who are living next door to you and you have no idea that their business or their profession in life is to be a musician. And I think my inspiration for that has always been the Piano Man Jazz Club, where I met a lot of musicians, where I understood, where I met a lot of musicians. I've always had an inclination to music because my mom was a classical singer and she made me do drums, etc. But the idea to put out musicians who are not known to the world and even to India, who would be living next door to you, was something I got from the jazz club. Um, it was very important to me because I thought that they were doing much better music than most of the music that I've heard in India. They were doing music which was incredibly great. They were singing in English without you realizing also that they are part of your community or they're a part of India itself. I feel there is a lot of talent which goes wasted because nobody talks about it.
Yeah.
And that is where I wanted Bookstime Music to come in, for the simple reason that I wanted to talk about musicians who you don't see at your NH7, who you don't see performing in London to a huge crowd, which is a lot of Indian independent artists even now. I wanted to dedicate it to people who are doing your corporate shows, who are doing your wedding shows, but actually genuinely have a lot of interest in music, and given to them, they would do a very different type of music if they weren't doing these shows.
Absolutely.
That is the music that I wanted to bring to people, which I have understood I've done a pretty good job in, thankfully. It is like, for example, the one person whose caption or whose review when I wrote, I was extremely like happy, was Natalie Ramirez, who's a Mexican who shifted to India to learn the bansuri, and she's been living in India for 10 years. And I've never heard anybody play the flute or the bansuri as well as her. And it shocks me that people don't know, because she doesn't put herself out as much as she should. Or maybe people just don't want to listen to what kind of music she portrays in the world. But the reason that I put out about her is because I personally feel her music is great. And I know that the next morning when she woke up, she had a few more followers, and she's like, I was wondering why it happened. And that for me was the day that thankfully Nat at least got a few followers, and Nat at least has a few people who will want to listen to her music now.
And what,
And now she's in, like, in people's eyes at least, and I think that's important.
and where does your love for tea come from? From chai?
Chai is my mother. That's completely my mother. My mother can drink tea, and you know this. My mother and your mother can sit and have tea. They will spill the tea before it was spill the tea. That's completely my mom. I think she used to drink tea a lot when I was a child, but I never liked tea as much. I was very Bonvita and Complan and hot chocolate. But there was a point where I wanted to lose weight, so I thought, let's try green tea and a cup of green tea, and I was like, it's not so bad. Then I shifted to some lemon tea, then Earl Grey, and I think it was that first sip of Earl Grey that I realized that I really want like tea in my life. If I've not had tea in the morning, I have a terrible day.
Right.
Not
And
a
now, so what are your next steps for your page, for your future?
For my future, it is that I want to work. I want to continue working in content, but I want to preferably work in the education sector. That is in the edtech sector specifically, because especially edtech sector, which works with children in the primary section or with teenagers, not so much in the higher schooling, higher education side. I've actually worked in the education sector quite a bit, but I want to work with building content in this sector to build a community or build at least a kind of place where children can choose what they want to choose, and they don't have to decide too much, or they don't have to think too much as to whether this will work or this will not work. They don't have to think that much about it. So I want that to be there for children. So that's where I want to be working in. I also feel like edtech is the future if this keeps continuing.
Yeah.
um, there's a lot of education technology companies which are working towards building creativity amongst the children, and I think that is also one of the things that really fascinates me, because if you can take a laptop and tell a child to not look at YouTube, you've achieved it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely think you've achieved it. I also think that children can learn a lot from YouTube, but it comes at a way later stage that you decide that you want to learn from YouTube. And since you're born into a generation of YouTube, let's move you away from YouTube and let's see something else also.
Right.
But that's where I come from. That's what I want to do in the future. With my page, I definitely want to do a little more tea and music, because I think I've really not been as competent with it as I would want to be. I do want to talk about other music that I listen to, not just Indian independent artists. The fact that I probably want to do something to do with old school rock and jazz, because those are two of them that I feel have lost their essence and their love amongst the younger generation, and I would like to bring it back. I would also like to talk a lot about Indian classical music and fusion Indian classical, that we have a lot of abundance of it in India, and probably which bands you could listen to, and talk about that. On the books front, actually, we are doing pretty well, because there is one more readathon which is going to come in September. I ran something called a 24 across 48, which is to read for 24 hours across a weekend. And along with that, I think I have a few goals that I want to finish this year. That is that I want to read 2 nonfiction. I've done with one. Second one will happen by the end of the year. I want to read more classics, and preferably I will be reading classics on the audiobook, because I've recently discovered Emma on the audiobook and I'm absolutely loving it. I think Nightly is just Nightly. Um, and I will be finishing 20 books hopefully by the year, and I should have more reviews and less just posts randomly. I want more reviews on my page.
So, do you have any parting words or any words of wisdom for anybody to pick up a book, to listen to good music, anything? Yeah.
If you are someone who works who is working with children, or if you are a parent, there is a book called Wonder by R.J. Palacio, which is about a child, and it's also made into a movie. But I would urge you to pick up the book actually, which is about a child who goes through 27 surgeries by the time he is 20, by the time he's 10 years old, and this is the first time that he's not going to be homeschooled, and he's going to go to school by himself, and he's going to meet other people. He has a lot of facial deformities, which is why he's a little scared about going to school. The book is written from Augie, his name is August Pullman, from his perspective and from his sister's perspective, and all the other people who get in contact with him. It is not written from a parent's perspective, but it is one of the best books that I read in 2018. It was, in fact, suggested to me by an educator herself, saying that if you ever want to teach your children, or if you ever want to teach kids sympathy, and if you ever want to teach kids why kindness is important in this world, then you need to read this book. And it's a fabulous book. You must.
Well, thank you very much, Pratiksha. And for all of you who do not follow her, please go on to Instagram and go to Books Time Music and follow her. She has great book reviews and she's done a brilliant job. So thank you very much for tuning in and all the best of luck for your future endeavors.
You
Thank
too.